Hello everyone, my name is Haire, and today I'll be presenting social disorganization theory as it relates to criminology. In this presentation, I will be explaining what social disorganization theory is, some important concepts, background information, some research that's gone into the topic, as well as context as to when it was created. We'll also look into some pros and cons of this theory, as it is not a one-size-fits-all situation. It should be used in special situations. Additionally, we'll look at some facts that this theory has brought to light over its criminological lifespan, as well as its validity in modern criminology and what it can do in the current day. So, social disorganization theory is the relationship between criminal behavior and the environment. Specifically, it states that when an environment, especially socially and environmentally, falls apart, crime is more likely to occur. Crime is a byproduct of poor environmental and communal situations, according to this theory. Additionally, and rather interestingly, especially in a criminological aspect, this theory states that the responsibility of the crime is that of the environment, not the individual who specifically committed the crime in the first place. And this theory also explains that when areas become criminal hotspots or they tend to attract crime or have a high crime rate, the communal breakdown that originally caused it will be stuck in this circular cycle, or the spiraling cycle rather, of worsening communal situation crime, which further worsens it and makes it a worse place to be for all. So the origins of social disorganization theory began in the 1920s when researchers began looking into social ties between city zones, working inward and to outward. This was known as the concentric zone model by Park and Burgess, which largely inspired social disorganization theory down the line. Park and Burgess's research, as well as Sean McKay's research, who were the fathers of the juvenile delinquency and social disorganization theory research. Their data was, as it eventually achieved, designed to determine if environments could be linked to criminal behavior, and specifically what aspects of those environments would correlate. Since this was the 1920s to the 1940s, major urbanization was taking place in the United States, and as such, this research was placed as a high priority in this field, as it was increasing in value as urbanization increased. In 1942, Sean McKay built off of Park and Burgess's zone model and finally published their workbook, the Juvenile Delinquency in Urban Areas book, which was the official beginning of social disorganization theory. And that book spent a large amount of time mapping crime rates in different neighborhoods in specifically Chicago. Foundations of this theory began in the correlation between environmental and community aspects and their interrelationship. Another foundational concept of this theory is the fact that individuals are products of their environment. This theory entirely ignores the nature of a human or the aspects of anything beyond the environment itself. Community bonds are a major part of this theory as well, as intercommunal cooperation has been found to reduce the likelihood of crime. The opposite is the case, as it does lead to crime when there is less cooperation. Another major aspect of this theory was part of the concentric zone theory. It's called the zone of transition, which is the residential, industrial, and business sections of a growing city. When they tend to overlap, especially when urbanization is happening rapidly, as it was when this theory was published, it can lead to a bunch of different people from different social spheres in the same area that have failed to acclimate towards each other, which worsens social ties and harms the overall community. Community facilities are also a huge part of this theory, as These things tend to fall apart when the community fails to get along and to work together to cooperate for communal good. So things like schools, churches, libraries, public facilities, they tend to fall apart alongside the rising of crime rates. Social disorganization is a difficult concept at first, so I would like to quantify some of those terms. Poor social control and a lack of trust between neighbors is extremely common in this context. As I mentioned a moment ago, community facilities are underfunded or unkempt and uncared for in general, which makes it more difficult for social ties to be reformed between neighbors. City growth often coincides with these unstable social areas. As a transition zone, it can often coincide with this. Poverty tends to be more common in these areas as well. Desperation is a byproduct of that poverty, which can lead people, especially when there's a lack of trust between neighbors, to turn towards crime to make a financial living. And another interesting aspect of this was cultural homogeneity, which never occurs in a socially disorganized area, which is when either racial or ethnic or religious or some combination of the three groups refuse to coexist in a homogeneous way, and they tend to isolate themselves from each other, which can lead to an echo chamber situation where criminal subcultures are created within those cultures. Empirical support for this theory has been found numerous times over the 40 plus years it's been around, 60 plus years, and it has found that the less organized socially and structurally an area is, it is consistently higher crime rate, regardless of the groups of people that are present, interestingly enough. Ethnicities, immigration, everything in that type does not seem to apply whatsoever. Additionally, although it should be relatively expected, areas with better funding and social cooperation, mutual trust between neighbors, and things of the like always have significantly lower crime rates than any socially disorganized area. Transition zones between the residential, industrial, and corporate area zones in a city always tend to attract residentially mobile persons who are short-term residents and therefore uncommitted to an area, and as such they're more likely to commit crimes and cause social tension. Modern implications for this theory are threefold. First of all, first responders have used this information to better allocate resources and insert this information into modern GPS systems so as to spend more energy keeping more crime-ridden areas safe and avoid putting more effort than is needed into a safer area. Additionally, this theory laid the groundwork for prevention and after-school programs, especially for the youth. This nurtures social ties and prevents social tension from being formed too early. And thirdly, courts have picked up on this somewhat and have allowed for alternative punishments and community collaboration efforts to be used so as to reduce the amount of social damage done to a criminal perpetrator. This theory is far from perfect, and there are pros and cons to it, which I'd like to go over before I wrap up here. Some pros I'd like to point to is that because it does not individually or ethnically blame a person, it is incredibly observation and pattern focused. It investigates the environment rather than the person, which is often more easily studied. And it has laid the groundwork for some very productive and helpful programs in the past, such as the community prevention programs and social support collectives. There are some cons to this theory, however, as many of the experts in this theory will underestimate the importance of an individual criminal's traits, including conscious decision-making, psychological factors, Additionally, this theory was designed for street-level crime, not higher-level crime such as corporate or white-collar, and as such, it loses relevancy the higher up the crime goes. In summary, this theory explains where crime perseveres, why this crime tends to maintain where it does. It laid the groundwork for community support programs, which have reduced crime ever since then. And this theory is not perfect. It's not a theory for every criminological subject, but it is extremely relevant in modern criminology to this day. Thank you for your time.